My name is Margaret. I found a bag on the road in my village. There is raw gold inside it, and this number was on a paper in the bag.
Gold? Margaret's hand shook so badly that the small piece of paper almost fell from her fingers. Not sand, not stones, not brass. It was raw gold. Her heart began to beat so fast. She stood on the side of the untarred village road, breathing hard, one hand under her heavy belly, the other inside the dusty bag she had just picked from the ground. The afternoon sun was hot. Dry wind pushed loose sand against her slippers. A motorcycle passed in the distance. Inside the bag, yellow pieces wrapped in nylon, and on top of them, a folded paper with a phone number. Margaret looked around quickly. She didn't see anybody. No shouting, no car turning back, no person running toward her. Just the wide village road and her own breathing. For 1 second, a thought entered her mind. This could change everything. Food, hospital bills, baby clothes, a proper room, a safe delivery, maybe even a new life. Her lips trembled. No one saw me, she whispered to herself. Then she froze at the sound of her own voice, because another voice rose in her memory. Her mother's voice, soft, firm, the kind that did not need shouting to enter your heart. If it is not yours, don't carry another person's tears into your house. Margaret closed her eyes. Tears burned there immediately. Mother, she whispered. Then the baby inside her moved. A slow, heavy kick. Margaret looked down at her stomach and let out a weak breath. I know. She opened her old phone. The small phone had a cracked screen and a rubber band around the back so the battery would not slip out. Her fingers were dusty. She wiped them on her faded gown and stared at the number again. What if it is a trap? She muttered. Still, she pressed the number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Margaret almost ended the call. Then a woman picked. Hello?
Hello?
The voice said quickly, with panic already inside it. Margaret swallowed. Good afternoon, Ma. Who is this? The woman asked. Please, who is this? My name is Margaret.
My name is Margaret,
she said slowly. I found a bag on the road in my village. There is raw gold inside it, and this number was on a paper in the bag. There was sudden silence on the line. Then Margaret heard a broken sound, as if the woman had started crying and was trying to stop. Oh, God, the woman whispered. Oh, God, please, that bag is mine. Margaret tightened her grip on the phone. The woman continued, voice shaking now. I came to buy gold from local miners this morning. I was driving back already. I didn't know when the bag slipped off. I have been searching like a madwoman. Margaret said nothing. She was listening carefully. The woman lowered her voice. Please don't cut the call. Please. That bag is all I have left. Margaret's chest tightened. Where are you? The woman asked quickly. Tell me where you are. I'll come back now. Margaret looked around the road. There was an old mango tree a few steps away and a broken signpost leaning to one side. I'm near Umuode Village Junction, she said, close to the old mango tree by the untarred road. I know that place, the woman replied at once. Stay there, please stay there. I am turning back now. Margaret hesitated. Ma, yes, please come yourself. I will, and come alone. The woman paused, then answered gently, I understand. I will come myself. The call ended. Margaret lowered the phone slowly. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the bag like it might disappear. Then she carried it carefully and moved under the mango tree. Her legs were already hurting. Her back felt tight. She eased herself down onto a low stone and placed the bag on her lap. A few village children passed and looked at her. One little girl stopped. "Auntie Margaret, are you okay?" Margaret forced a smile. "I'm fine." But she was not fine. Nothing in her life was fine. 4 months earlier, her husband, Amadi, had kissed her forehead in the morning and told her he would come back early. He was a taxi driver, a hard-working man, not rich, not connected, just decent. That evening, strangers brought the news. There had been an attack on the express road. And just like that, Amadi was gone. No warning, no last words, no chance to prepare. Since then, Margaret had been surviving on pity, borrowed food and silence. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night and stretch her hand to the other side of the mat, forgetting he was dead. Then reality would return, cold, cruel, heavy. Now this strange bag, this sudden test. Margaret rubbed her stomach again. "Your father would have told me to return it," she murmured, "even when it hurts." A few minutes later, the sound of a car came from down the road. Margaret stood up too fast and nearly lost balance. A dark car approached, raising dust behind it. It slowed, then stopped. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out, and the moment her eyes landed on Margaret, everything changed. Because the woman did not look like someone who had merely lost money. She looked like someone who had been holding herself together by a thread. And when she saw the pregnant widow standing there with the bag still untouched in her hands, she stopped walking. Her face fell. Her eyes widened. And then she said, almost in a whisper, "You mean, you really waited for me?" The woman's voice trembled. Margaret held the dusty bag with both hands and nodded slowly. "Yes, Ma." For a few seconds, the woman simply stood there, staring at her as if she could not believe what she was seeing. Then she walked forward quickly. Up close, Margaret noticed things she hadn't seen before. The woman looked rich. Her dress was simple but expensive. Her shoes were clean, even on the dusty road. But her face looked like someone who had not slept for days. "My name is Kelly," the woman said softly. Margaret nodded. "I'm Margaret." Kelly looked down at the bag in Margaret's hands. Her breathing became uneven. "May I see it?" Margaret stretched it forward. Kelly opened it carefully. The gold pieces were still inside. Every single one. For a moment, Kelly did not move. Then suddenly, she closed the bag and covered her mouth with her hand. Tears rolled down her cheek. "Oh my God," she whispered. Margaret felt uncomfortable seeing her cry. "I didn't touch anything," she said quickly. "I only opened it to see what was inside." Kelly looked at her again, this time longer. Her eyes moved slowly from Margaret's tired face to her worn slippers, to her swollen stomach, to the faded gown she wore. Kelly shook her head slowly, almost in disbelief. "You are pregnant," she said quietly. Margaret nodded. "How many months?" 8, Kelly swallowed. "And you still returned this?" Margaret shifted her weight. "Well, it isn't mine." Kelly laughed weakly through her tears. "Do you know how many people in this world would have disappeared with this bag? Margaret gave a small shrug. My mother would have chased me in my dreams if I kept it. Kelly blinked. What? Margaret smiled faintly. She always said, if you take what doesn't belong to you, you carry someone else's pain into your house. Kelly stared at her. Then she shook her head again. Incredible! She suddenly wiped her tears and opened the back door of her car. Please get in. Margaret hesitated. Ma? Please, Kelly said gently. Just sit inside first. Margaret looked at the empty road, then back at Kelly. Something about the woman felt sincere. Slowly, she climbed into the car. It was the cleanest place she had sat in months. The seat felt soft. Kelly entered the driver's side and started the engine. Margaret noticed she was still holding the bag of gold tightly. You are not going back to the village? Margaret asked quietly. Kelly shook her head. No. Where are we going? Kelly glanced at her. To my house. Margaret sat upright immediately. Your house? Yes. Margaret looked nervous. But I only came to return the bag. Kelly smiled slightly. And I want to understand the person who returned it. The car began to move. Dust rose behind them as they left the village road. For almost an hour they drove. Margaret watched the surroundings slowly change. The dusty roads disappeared. Concrete buildings appeared. More cars. More people. Then wide tarred roads. Finally, a large gate opened slowly in front of them. Margaret's mouth parted. Where is this place? Aja, Kelly replied. The car drove into a compound that looked like something from television. A massive mansion stood in the centre. Tall pillars, glass balconies, beautiful gardens. Margaret's hands tightened around her stomach. Ma, I think you brought me to the wrong house. Kelly laughed softly. No, Margaret, this is my house. The car stopped. Margaret stepped out slowly. She felt small standing there. Very small. Inside the mansion, the air felt cool and calm. Kelly guided her to a large living room and pointed to a couch. Please sit. Margaret sat carefully, afraid to dirty the furniture. Kelly placed the bag of gold on the table. Then she sat across from Margaret. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Kelly asked gently, Tell me about yourself. Margaret looked down. Her fingers twisted together. It's not much of a story. I still want to hear it, Kelly said softly. Margaret took a slow breath. My husband was a taxi driver. Kelly listened quietly. His name was Amadi, Margaret continued. He died 4 months ago. Kelly's expression changed. How? There was an attack on the express road. He was carrying passengers when it happened. Kelly lowered her head. Margaret continued slowly. I was already pregnant. After he died, everything became difficult. I lost our room because I couldn't pay rent. Her voice began to shake. Sometimes neighbours give me food. Sometimes I borrow. Sometimes I sleep hungry. Kelly's eyes were already wet again. But today, Margaret said softly, I was walking to the market to beg a woman to give me rice on credit. Silence filled the room. Kelly whispered, And you still return the gold? Margaret looked up. I told you, Ma, that's how my mother raised me. Kelly wiped her face slowly. Then she leaned forward. You said your mother told you something. Margaret nodded. She said, If you find something that belongs to someone else, remember that while you may be smiling, the owner might be crying. Kelly closed her eyes. When she opened them again, tears rolled freely down her cheeks. Your mother was right. Margaret looked confused. Kelly placed her hand gently on the bag of gold. This bag, she said quietly, was also my last hope. Margaret frowned slightly. Kelly continued slowly. My husband died last year. Margaret's eyes widened. I sold everything we had, Kelly said. Cars, land, jewelry, everything. She tapped the bag lightly. This was the money I used to buy raw gold from miners in the village. I planned to sell it in Lagos and double the profit. Margaret whispered. So if you lost it, I would have lost everything. Margaret felt chills run through her body. Kelly looked at her again. If you had kept this bag, my life would have collapsed today. Margaret said nothing. Kelly suddenly smiled, but it was a strange smile. She stood up slowly. Margaret? Yes, Ma? Kelly walked closer. You did something very rare today. Margaret lowered her eyes. Kelly continued, and I will not reward you the usual way. Margaret looked confused. The usual way? She asked. Kelly nodded. Yes. She paused, then said something that made Margaret's heart jump. I'm not giving you cash. Margaret blinked in surprise. Kelly smiled again. I'm giving you something bigger. Margaret leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? Kelly rested her hand on the bag of gold and said quietly, when I sell this gold, you will own 20% of the entire profit. Margaret's mouth opened, but no words came out, and Kelly had not even finished speaking yet, because the next thing she said would change Margaret's life forever. Margaret stared at Kelly. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. 20%? She repeated slowly, almost like she had not heard correctly. Kelly nodded calmly. Yes. Margaret shook her head quickly. No, Ma. That's too much. I only returned what belongs to you. Kelly smiled gently. That is exactly why you deserve it. Margaret looked confused. But I didn't do anything special. Kelly leaned back slightly and crossed her arms. Margaret, do you know how many people would have disappeared with that bag? Margaret remained silent. Kelly continued. Some people would have turned off their phones. Some would have sold the gold secretly. Some would have even denied finding anything. She paused and looked straight into Margaret's eyes. But you called. Margaret swallowed. Kelly's voice softened. And you waited. Margaret lowered her eyes, embarrassed. For a moment, the room was quiet again. Then Margaret spoke slowly. But, Ma, even if you want to reward me, 20% is too big. Kelly shook her head. You don't understand yet. Margaret looked up. Kelly continued. I'm not just rewarding you. I'm inviting you. Inviting me? Yes. To what? Kelly placed her hand on the bag again. To business. Margaret blinked rapidly. Business? Kelly nodded. Yes. Margaret gave a small, nervous laugh. Ma, I'm a village woman. I don't know anything about business. Kelly smiled. That's fine. Margaret looked confused. Why? Because honesty is harder to find than business knowledge. Margaret didn't know how to respond. Kelly leaned forward again. Listen carefully. Margaret nodded slowly. When I sell this gold, I will give you 20% of the profit. Margaret's heart began to race again. And after that, Kelly continued, I will teach you how this business works. Margaret stared at her. Teach? Me? Yes. How to buy gold, how to sell it, how to grow money. Margaret suddenly felt overwhelmed. Her eyes filled with tears. Ma, why would you help me like this? Kelly's expression changed. For a moment she looked far away. Then she spoke quietly. Because someone once helped me too. Margaret wiped her eyes slowly. Kelly stood up and walked toward the large window overlooking the compound. My husband used to say something, she said softly. Margaret waited. He said the world only becomes better when good people help each other grow. Kelly turned back to Margaret. And today, Margaret, you proved you are a good person. Margaret could no longer hold back her tears. She covered her face briefly. I only did what my mother taught me. Kelly walked back and sat beside her. And that teaching just changed your life. 2 months later, Margaret stood inside a hospital room. Sweat covered her face. Her hands gripped the bedsheet tightly. Push, the nurse said. Margaret screamed. Kelly stood beside the bed, holding Margaret's hand. You're doing well, Kelly encouraged. Push again. Margaret cried loudly and pushed with everything she had. Then suddenly, a baby's cry filled the room. The nurse smiled. It's a girl. Margaret burst into tears. Kelly wiped her own eyes too. The nurse gently placed the tiny baby in Margaret's arms. Margaret stared at the small face, overwhelmed. My daughter, she whispered. Kelly leaned closer. What will you name her? Margaret looked at the baby again. Then she smiled through tears. Favor? Kelly smiled warmly. That is the perfect name. Life began to change quickly after that. The gold Kelly sold brought a huge profit. When she handed Margaret her 20% share, Margaret nearly fainted. 20 million naira? Margaret gasped. Kelly laughed softly. Yes? Margaret held the check with trembling hands. I have never seen this kind of money before. Kelly smiled. You'll see much more. And she kept her promise. Kelly taught Margaret everything. How to negotiate with miners. How to identify real gold. How to sell to large buyers in Lagos. Margaret learned quickly. Within a year, Margaret moved from the village to Lagos. She bought a comfortable house not far from Kelly's mansion in Aja. Baby Favor grew strong and healthy. And slowly, the small, struggling widow became a confident businesswoman. Together, Kelly and Margaret built one of the most successful gold trading businesses in Lagos. People began to know their names. They were invited to business meetings, investment forums, economic conferences. Sometimes Margaret would stand on a stage and tell her story. Each time she reached the part about the bag of gold, the room would fall silent. Honesty saved my life, she would say. And it all started on a dusty village road. Years passed. Little Favor grew from a toddler into a bright young girl, then into a beautiful young woman. After finishing university, she joined her mother in the gold business. Sometimes the two of them would visit Kelly together. And every time they arrived, Kelly would open the door with a big smile. My 2 daughters are here, she would say happily. Favor always hugged her tightly. Second mother, she would laugh. Kelly loved hearing that. But even as their success continued to grow, Margaret often remembered the moment that changed everything. The dusty road, the bag, the decision. One small choice, one moment of honesty, and a life that could have gone in two completely different directions. Because if she had made a different choice that day, everything might have ended very differently. And that truth would soon reveal something Margaret never expected. Moral lessons from the story. 1. Honesty can change your life. Even when Margaret was poor, hungry, and pregnant, she chose honesty over greed. That single decision opened the door to opportunities she never imagined. Doing the right thing, even when it is difficult, can lead to unexpected blessings. 2. Integrity is more valuable than wealth. Money and gold can be lost or found, but a person's character is priceless. Kelly trusted Margaret and helped her because she saw her integrity. Good character attracts trust, respect, and long-term success. 3. Kindness and gratitude multiply goodness. Kelly could have simply taken her gold and left, but she chose to help Margaret build a better life. When people repay honesty with kindness, everyone grows. Helping others succeed creates a stronger and better world. What is your view about this story? Where are you watching from? If you enjoyed this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.